In a small, quiet village nestled between rolling hills, there lived a shepherd boy named Jacob. His job was to watch over the village's flock of sheep as they grazed on the grassy hillside. It wasn't an easy job, but it was important. The villagers trusted him to keep the sheep safe from any danger, especially from wolves that sometimes roamed the nearby forest. But to Jacob, the days felt long and boring. The sheep didn't do much besides munch on grass, and the village seemed too far away for him to play with other children. He sat on a rock, watching the sheep, feeling a little lonely and restless. Jacob began to grow tired of the same routine every day. He would sit on the hill, watch the sheep, and wait for the sun to set. There was nothing exciting about it. He felt invisible, as if no one cared what he did out here. He watched the villagers go about their day in the distance, and sometimes he wished for a little adventure, anything to break the monotony. "I wish something exciting would happen," Jacob muttered to himself. Throwing a small stone into the grass, he watched the stone bounce, thinking of how he could make his day a little more interesting. As Jacob stared at the sheep lazily grazing, an idea popped into his head. He remembered the stories the villagers told about wolves lurking in the forest. A mischievous smile spread across his face. "What if I yelled for help?" he thought. "What if I cried wolf? Everyone would come running." Jacob imagined the villagers rushing up the hill, worried for the sheep and for him. They would praise him for his bravery. For once, his boring day would be filled with excitement. Without thinking much more about it, Jacob decided to go through with his plan. Jacob took a deep breath and cupped his hands around his mouth. "Wolf! Wolf!" he shouted as loudly as he could. His voice echoed across the hills and down into the village. Immediately, he saw heads turning. The villagers dropped what they were doing and grabbed sticks and tools, ready to defend the sheep. Jacob's heart raced with excitement. It was working! He watched as the villagers hurried up the hill, worry etched on their faces. The villagers arrived at the top of the hill, breathless and ready to confront the wolf. But when they looked around, all they saw were the sheep peacefully grazing, and Jacob grinning from ear to ear. "Where's the wolf?" one of the villagers asked, looking confused. Jacob burst out laughing. "There is no wolf," he exclaimed. "It was just a joke." The villagers frowned. They were not amused. "That's not funny, Jacob," an old man said sternly. "You shouldn't cry wolf unless there's real danger. We came to help, and there was nothing." The villagers shook their heads in frustration. "You wasted our time," another man said, putting his stick back on his shoulder. "We have important work to do. If you cry wolf again, we might not believe you next time." Jacob shrugged. He didn't see what the big deal was. It had been funny, and besides, it was the most excitement he had had in days. The villagers walked back down to the village, grumbling about the false alarm. Jacob hardly paid attention. He was still laughing to himself. "What's the harm in a little joke?" he thought. A few days passed, and once again, Jacob found himself sitting on the same rock, watching the sheep do nothing but graze. His joke had brought a little excitement to his day, but now the boredom had returned. He tossed pebbles into the stream, sighing. "Maybe I should do it again," Jacob thought. "Just once more, for fun." He remembered how everyone had rushed up the hill, how they had looked at him with concern, and how thrilling it had felt to be at the center of attention. Without thinking twice, Jacob stood up and cried out even louder than before, "Wolf! Wolf! There's a wolf!" His voice echoed down the hill, reaching the ears of the villagers below. Once again, the villagers stopped what they were doing, grabbed their tools, and ran up the hill to save the sheep. Jacob could hardly contain his laughter as he watched them race toward him, panic written on their faces.
In a small, quiet village, nestled between rolling hills and green fields, there lived a poor farmer named Agathon. Each day, he worked tirelessly in his fields, plowing and sowing seeds, hoping that the harvest would bring enough crops to feed him and his family. Despite his hard work, he never seemed to have enough to live comfortably. His house was modest, his clothes threadbare, and his meals meager. Agathon was content with the little he had, but as time went on, the thought of prosperity began to linger in his mind. He dreamed of a life of luxury, of not having to toil under the harsh sun for the rest of his days. He longed for riches that would make his life easier and allow him to live in comfort. One crisp morning, Agathon went to check on his animals, just like any other day. As he approached the nest where his goose, a plump bird with white feathers and a calm demeanor, usually laid her eggs, he was surprised to find something extraordinary, a single, gleaming golden egg nestled in the straw. His heart skipped a beat. He blinked and looked again. It was a golden egg. Not just any egg, but one that shimmered like the sun. Agathon's pulse quickened as he carefully picked it up, feeling its weight in his hands. It was cold to the touch, but its brilliance filled him with warmth and excitement. With trembling hands, Agathon held the golden egg up to the light, marveling at its beauty. He had never seen anything like it. It was so smooth, so perfect, and so valuable. He knew instantly that this egg could change his life. Without wasting another moment, he carefully placed it in a cloth and hurried to the market. When Agathon arrived at the bustling village market, he felt a mixture of anticipation and wonder. He approached a group of merchants and held up the egg. The crowd gathered around, their eyes widening in amazement. Word spread quickly through the market, and soon, people from all corners of the village were staring at the miraculous egg. A wealthy merchant, who dealt in rare treasures, immediately offered Agathon a large sum of money. Agathon hesitated for a moment, but his hunger for better days overtook him. He accepted the offer, and in exchange for the golden egg, he received more money than he had ever seen in his entire life. Over the next few days, Agathon's life changed dramatically. The golden egg had brought him prosperity beyond his wildest dreams. He used the money to buy better food, new clothes, and even a small, cozy home. He could sleep soundly at night, knowing that he had no debts and that he was no longer poor. But Agathon was not content. The excitement of his newfound wealth soon gave way to something darker: greed. He began to wonder how many more golden eggs his goose could produce. If one egg was worth so much, how much wealth could he accumulate if the goose kept laying? One morning, Agathon went to the nest and found another golden egg. He could hardly believe it. His goose was producing a golden egg every day. As he held the second egg in his hand, his thoughts turned darker. If I can get one egg a day, what would happen if I could get them all at once? He thought. The idea began to consume him. His heart pounded with the thought of endless riches, piles of golden eggs that would make him the wealthiest man in the village, perhaps even in the entire kingdom. Agathon was no longer content with just the steady flow of wealth. He wanted it all, and he wanted it now. As the days went by, Agathon grew more impatient. He couldn't shake the thought that the goose was hiding something from him. Surely, if she could lay golden eggs so effortlessly, there must be more inside her. The idea of having instant wealth became too tempting to resist. He imagined himself relaxing in luxury, no longer having to work the fields, no longer worrying about the future. He started to grow annoyed with the slow, steady pace of the golden eggs. The summer sun hung high in the sky, blazing down on the land. The earth was dry and cracked, and the leaves on the trees drooped under the relentless heat. Animals sought shade under the few remaining green trees, and rivers had turned into narrow trickles. Among the animals struggling in the heat was a little crow. His feathers were dusty, and his throat felt as dry as the desert sand. "Oh, how I wish I could find a drop of water," the crow thought as he flew over the parched fields. His wings were heavy, and his thirst was growing unbearable. But the crow was a hopeful bird, and he knew he had to keep searching for water. With determination in his eyes, the crow flew over fields and forests, but all the streams and ponds he once knew had dried up. He flew past a farmhouse, where he saw animals gathered around an empty trough. The crow called out, "Have you seen any water?" But the animals shook their heads sadly. There was no water to be found. The crow flew on, his heart sinking a little, but he was not ready to give up. There must be water somewhere, he told himself, flapping his wings harder despite the heat. After what seemed like hours, the crow spotted a small village in the distance. From above, the village rooftops shimmered in the heat, but something caught the crow's sharp eyes. Next to one of the houses, there were pots lined up outside. His heart lifted with hope. "Perhaps one of those pots has water," he thought excitedly. With a burst of energy, he swooped down towards the village, hoping that his long search was finally coming to an end. The crow landed on a fence near the row of pots and peered inside them. His heart sank. The first pot was empty. So was the second. He flew from one to the other, desperately looking for a drop of water, but every pot was dry as dust. He sighed in disappointment. Just as the crow was about to give up, something caught his eye at the far end of the row. There was one last pot, smaller than the rest. It looked different. Could it have water? The crow hopped over to the small pot and peered inside. To his delight, he saw a little bit of water at the bottom. His beak tingled with excitement. At last, he thought, bending down to drink. But the water was too far down. The pot was deep, and his beak couldn't reach the water. The crow tried again, stretching his neck as far as he could, but the water remained just out of reach. His excitement quickly turned to frustration. He had finally found water, but he couldn't drink it. The crow fluttered his wings in frustration. "What good is water if I can't reach it?" he squawked angrily. He flew around the pot, trying to think of a way to get to the water. He tried tipping the pot over, but it was too heavy. No matter how hard he pushed, the pot wouldn't budge. He even tried sticking his whole head inside the pot, but his beak barely touched the water before it was stopped by the narrow opening. The crow sat down next to the pot, feeling tired and defeated. His thirst was unbearable now, but the solution seemed impossible. The crow looked at the water again. It was so close, just a few inches away, yet it felt so far. He stood up and tried again, stretching his neck and beak as far as they could go into the pot. His beak touched the cool water for a brief moment, but he couldn't scoop up enough to drink. Frustrated, the crow sat down again. He could feel the weight of failure pressing down on him, but he wasn't ready to give up just yet. Determined to try something else, the crow decided to tip the pot over. If I can just knock it over, the water will spill out, he thought. He flew up to the top of the pot and started pushing it with all his might. He flapped his wings hard and pushed with his feet, but the pot didn't move. "Why is this pot so heavy?" the crow grumbled. He tried again, putting all his weight against the pot, but still, it didn't budge. Exhausted, the crow sat down once more, panting. His beak was dry, and his wings ached from all the effort. Just as the crow was about to give up, something small and shiny caught his eye. Scattered around the ground were little pebbles, smooth and round. The crow stared at them for a moment, and then an idea popped into his head. "What if I drop these pebbles into the pot?" he thought. "Maybe the water will rise high enough for me to reach." Excited by this new idea, the crow picked up one of the pebbles in his beak and flew over to the pot.